Britta Forsberg. I'm the Executive Director of Save Barnegat Bay. Thank you so much for joining us today for our third in a series of Stormwater talks. This is Avery.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here.
So we're happy to have you, and we will have more programs actually unfolding through the fall. Today we have Chris Obropta with us from Rutgers, who's going to be presenting on the MS4 permits and responsibilities changes moving forward. And I think Chris will also let you know that you can get some Rutgers continuing education units from the program today, because I do know we have a lot of public employees, public works and such online, and also engineers. So make sure to remind us about that, Chris. You can drop any questions or thoughts that you might have alongside the program, throughout the program, and we'll try to get to them either at the end or as appropriate. And I hope you enjoy. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, let me share my screen here. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So my name's Chris Obropta. I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. I teach here in New Brunswick for the Environmental Science Department. I teach environmental engineering. My background is civil engineering, actually. I was born and raised in Jersey. I got my bachelor's and master's from NJIT, and I got my PhD from Stevens. Dr. Steve Souza is usually here with me helping teach these classes. He's not here today, but he will be back for the next one, I'm sure. So today we're going to talk about the MS4 permits. The 4 S's are separate storm source systems, so that's what they stand for. I tell people this was EPA's way of trying to be cute, MS4. This is what this stands for. Let's see. So all municipalities have MS4 permits. There's a general permit for Tier A, Tier B, public complexes and highway agencies. I believe some Tier B municipalities have moved into Tier A. I believe the state was trying to eliminate Tier B completely, but I'm not sure if that has been done yet or not. These permits are due to expire the end of this year, and a new permit will be issued on January 1st of 2023. And I'll talk a little bit about what the differences are between what we have now and what's being proposed for January. Okay. And this is not a DEP thing. This is an EPA requirement that was passed down to DEP. So DEP has taken EPA's requirements and has tried to develop regulations around them that are as painless as possible for the municipalities. So they really try to make an effort into not putting too much into this mandate of what you guys have to do. So and I think they did a fairly good job of it in their first round. So the whole idea is that we're trying to reduce discharge of pollution from your MS4 system. So that's your storm source system, and that can be the concrete pipings, inlets, the catch basins, could be simply roadside drainage ditches. So anything that's been built to move stormwater around is part of your MS4 system. It does not have to be gray infrastructure like concrete. It can be simply, swales or ditches along the side of the road. We talk a lot about non-point source pollution, and this is what we're targeting with this regulation. And when the Clean Water Act came out in 1972 and Richard Nixon signed it, it was really about point source pollution. So it was really about protecting our waterways in this nation from the discharges from wastewater treatment plant and industry. It was really those pipes that were flowing directly into the rivers that you could trace right back to an industry or a wastewater treatment plant. Over time, they've done a great job of upgrading those. Ocean County Utilities Authority has done a wonderful job along the shore. They're treating to very high quality levels now and dumping the treated effluent about a mile offshore now. But our waterways are still impaired. They're still polluted, and it's mostly because of non-point source pollution. So these are the non-point source pollutants we always talk about. Oil and grease from cars. Fertilizer is the big one. Fertilizer has nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium in it. and we put it on lawns to make the grass grow. When that fertilizer gets into our water bodies, it makes the algae grow. And then we get things like harmful algal blooms that we see throughout New Jersey. New Jersey did pass a fertilizer law in 2011, banning the use of phosphorus in their fertilizer for residential lawns. So when you go and see, go to Home Depot to buy a bag of fertilizer, most often that bag has 3 numbers on it. That middle number should be 0 or a very low number like 1, indicating that there's very little phosphorus in that bag of fertilizer. Animal waste is a big issue in New Jersey, not just people picking up after their dogs, but really the Canada goose. The goose lives to be 26 years old is the average lifespan of a goose. The goose will produce 10 pounds of feces a week, which is loaded with nutrients and pathogens that can get into the waterway and harm our environment and affect the public health. Grass clippings and leaves, when people start dumping this stuff into rivers, those stuff starts to decay and decompose, releasing nutrients into the system. So it's very important that when you see people jamming leaves or grass down the catch basins, that you stop them from doing that. When we do the leaf pickup, that we try to be aware of, keeping those leaves away from the inlets that are on the road, and washing that down into the streams. There's other things that we worry about too. Sediment is the #1 pollutant across the nation. So it's sediment that's washing off of, newly tilled agricultural lands. It's sediment that's coming from unmanaged construction sites, which is probably one of the biggest sources. It's sediment that's coming from, poorly managed lawns. So this is what we really kind of is a big issue. And with the sediment comes the nutrients come with it, and that causes a lot of problems with the algae, especially in places like Barnegat Bay and Tom's River, things like that. So every town has a pollution prevention plan. This was required back in 2004 when we first developed these regulations as a state. So the first MS4 rules were released in 2004. Shortly thereafter, towns had to come with a pollution prevention plan, and they upgraded them over time. You can see this is a cover, the one for the township of Berkeley. And you can see it's signed by Alan, who's the PE professional planner, and he's the fellow in charge of making sure that this plan is appropriate for the town. He is probably also the stormwater manager for the town of Berkeley. Okay. And you can see he's listed here. He's a stormwater program coordinator. Every town has a program coordinator, and this person is ultimately responsible for keeping the records of all the monitoring that's happening with the MS4 systems, and responsible every May for filing that annual report and ensuring that the township is in compliance with the MS4 regulations. So in this case, Township of Berkeley saw fit to have their township engineer as their program coordinator. I've seen other towns have the township clerk do it, which doesn't really seem appropriate to me. Head of Public Works is another person often selected. Sometimes it's a town business administrator, which is also kind of odd. But usually it's a town engineer, maybe the township planner, maybe the head of Public Works is usually what we see as a stormwater program coordinator. So you should know who that is in your town. Because that person's ultimately responsible for making sure this all gets submitted in a timely fashion. In the stormwater pollution prevention plans, there's basically 4 requirements. There's these state basic requirements, there's these other control measures, additional measures, and optional measures that we have to deal with. So we can see here that the basic requirements are listed here. These have not changed over from this year to next year. They really haven't added much to this. A lot of this stuff is pretty straightforward. We'll kind of go through some of these right now. You're required to have a municipal stormwater webpage. This has gotten more intense basically with the new regulations that are coming out in January. They're looking for a dedicated webpage. They want to, and they have templates available from the department. They want all these items posted on the webpage. You now have to post your MS4 infrastructure map, which is being required to be developed as part of the new permit that comes out in January. And this new thing called a Watershed Improvement Plan, which we'll talk a little bit about. So a lot of towns have a website, a web page attached to their municipal site, and it really just kind of talks about stormwater pollution. Now they want you to have posted clearly all these materials so they're easy to find. Um, so that's really the public involvement and participation piece and public outreach piece. The second piece here is public outreach and education, and this is interesting. They have a appendix in this MS4 permit, and the appendix has 5 different categories, and you need to get 12 points from each from the categories every year, and they have to be submitted. So you have to do these different educational and outreach activities, and for each activity you get your points. For example, putting up a rain garden sign or for one of your stormwater facilities gets you a certain number of points, and you can see this is the first category here. So they have social media, newspaper ads, and they tell you how many points each thing's worth. The bottom, you see they have green infrastructure signage, which was a sign we saw in the previous slide, and you can get up to 5 points for that, but you don't get 5 points for doing one sign. Each new sign gets you a half a point, and then existing signs that are being upgraded or maintained get you a quarter point. So you can quickly add up some points here and get close to, you need 12, so that's 5 easy points. Most towns have a place that makes signs for them so they can make the signs. I mean, we have Rutgers, we have a web page that has all examples of signs, so you can grab one of those PDFs, send it to the printer, and have it made. Pretty easy to do. Other things in this general public outreach category, billboard signage, murals, like people do some paintings on the sides of buildings and trying to focus on stormwater. And then stormwater facility signage, talk a little bit more about signage for that, not just green infrastructure, but for your detention basins and other things that you may have. So like I said, this is a sign that we have here. And that's it's not a bad sign to put in front of a rain garden. Tells you what it is, shows you the plants, explains what a rain garden is. This little bubble here. Turn the laser on here. The little bubble here talks about what a rain garden is, shows you different plants, tells you the location, tells you who's kind of responsible for it. So Rutgers was involved in this, DEP funded it, maybe Barnegat Bay is involved, so it shows all the participants on here. This was done in Union County and the city of Rahway, so their logos are on here. Tells you when it was installed, and there's a web page that you can go to and actually get more information on it. The second category is really focusing on targeted outreach audiences. So, here you're doing stormwater displays. In other words, every town has maybe an Earth Day event, or on Memorial Day, you have the fireworks you have in town, and maybe it's part of a bigger event. Tables are set up. This is a place to set up a stormwater display and get a point for it. Promotional items, keychains, temporary tattoos, bookmarks, things like that you can hand out. You get points for that. And usually that's tied to the display. So if you have a table set up at an event, you hand out some of these promotional items, you get 3 points right off the bat there. Private information to known owners of stormwater facilities not owned and operated by the municipalities. So there's 2 types of stormwater systems, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But there are stormwater facilities like detention basins that the township owns, and there's ones that are owned by private people, such as the homeowners association for that development down the road. So getting information out to those ones that are privately owned, explaining to them what they need to do, how they need to maintain them, is very important. So you get points for that. And DEP is trying to make it easy as possible. They give you the information right here is a link of what you can send out. So you can take that, print that out, maybe adapt a little bit for your town, throw a couple logos on there and send it out, and then save a copy to submit at the end of the year for your reporting for your MS4 permit, so you can get the points for it. So mailing campaign, a lot of people, when they send out their tax bills or their water bills, will have a flyer in there about stormwater management, a tip card, things like that. So that's another thing to do, or you can do its own mailing. That's another way to do it. And an ordinance, towns pass all these ordinances, and these are required to be passed. pet waste ordinance, wildlife feeding ordinance, litter ordinance. So the wildlife feeding ordinance is interesting. You're not supposed to be feeding wildlife. And I see this all the time, people feeding the deer, people feeding the stray cats. And that's against the ordinance. So sending out educational information about these ordinances, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. For example, don't dump your motor oil in the catch basin, right? So things like that is really kind of helpful, and you get points for that too. Youth and educational programs. What's nice about this is you've got, Save Barnegat Bay group in your area. There are other nonprofits around. New Jersey DEP has a Watershed ambassador. And a lot of these folks go into schools anywhere doing these presentations. So the idea is that if you're the town, you want to make sure you hook up with those organizations and find out what they're doing, because you can take credit for this. If Britta's going into a school, Avery's going to a school and teaching a fourth grade class about the water cycle and stormwater management, about the Barnegat Bay, that's a point, right? Just have to record when she did it, what school it was, and you submit it at the end of the year with your package, right? So that's really, really important. So they have a lot of different things here. Storm drain stenciling is interesting. A lot of times we were having the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts do that, and or a local group go out and do that. And for every 40 labels you put on a drain, you can get 3 points. Okay, so that's really important. Now, a lot of the storm drain labeling was done back in 2004, but here we are almost 20 years later, and a lot of that stuff has to get redone. So that's a place to look at. And when the townships are out inspecting the storm drain, the stormwater inlets and the catch basins, they can note where this label's missing, and maybe not to spend the time themselves of putting it in, but maybe they can have a group that's been organized by, Save Barnegat Bay or some other group to go out and put the labels on. And they have identified all the drains that need labels. Educational contests at schools are great, posters of why stormwater matters. And the AmeriCorps event, like I said, they have AmeriCorps ambassadors. They may do a stream cleanup. They may do a rain barrel workshop, something like that. So you get points for that. And then the town also has access to funding from DEP. And they could get some funding for garbage bags and gloves and things like that and do their own cleanup. And you see these kids are putting on the storm drain stenciling, and hopefully you're not breathing the fumes from that caulk there. But, you can see this is something that's pretty commonly done. School presentations. This is women here showing them the Enviroscape model. Kids tend to get a kick out of that. There's regional opportunities, and this presentation may be considered a regional educational presentation, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe get some credit for this, but participate in regional collaboration. So right now you've got a couple plans being done in the Barnegat Bay watershed. Watershed restoration plans are being done. Participating in that process could get you some points. Doing a green infrastructure workshop. We had one of those about a month ago. We did a workshop in the Barnegat Bay watershed. So organizing that, participating in that, rain barrel workshops, rain garden workshops, you get points for that. And then community activities, kind of another way to get points. So these are things that you can team up with other areas, other towns, and share the responsibility and get the points, or have an organization like Save Barnegat Bay organize something for you on your behalf, and then several towns could take credit for that, right? And you can see here is different kinds of workshops. And then finally, the last one is just community involvement activities. So, how do we get the community involved in things? So it's easy to educate people. There's kind of 3 levels of impact we look at. We look at an immediate impact where we educate people and we increase their knowledge and awareness. And that's pretty easy to do. People come to a meeting, we tell them some stuff, and they go home and they remember it. There's a second level where they actually take action based on what they learned. So they're changing their behavior. And this is kind of what this focus is on. So you went to a rain garden workshop and you're trying to get people to change their behavior to build a rain garden at home. So there's all these activities here. So we encourage the towns to work together. We encourage the towns to reach out to the nonprofits in the area and see if they can help you. And there's a lot of opportunities here to kind of do this work. And you can see here's a rain barrel workshop, fathers and sons working together. On the left-hand side, this is one that was done in Camden. They built all these rain barrels, and they actually had a rain barrel song. The kids were using the barrels as drums when they were singing. Yeah, I get a little kick out of that. So the next activity is post-construction stormwater management. And this is really easy. It's just really enforcing the municipal stormwater controls ordinance that you have in your town. So ensuring that practices are being installed properly, and making sure that every development is complying with the stormwater regulations. So that's pretty straightforward. We have pollution prevention goal housekeeping work. So this is basically focusing a lot on what we do as a town. So we have to pass these existing ordinances. There's new ordinances that we have to pass, a private salt storage ordinance. So in other words, if you're that homeowners association and you have your own salt pile, or you're the mall and you have your own salt pile, you have to show that it's being stored properly, so the salt isn't released into the environment. And then the tree removal replacement ordinance. So they're requiring towns to put in a tree ordinance, towns that don't have them. So if trees are cut down, you're required to replace them. You need permission to remove them. So these are ordinances that are going to be in the January to 2023 permit requirement. And obviously DEP will have samples of these ordinances that you can download and just adopt and pass, or maybe tailor for your own organization, your own town. A yard waste collection program. This has been in effect for a while. We've done a pretty good job of this as a town. So really trying to focus on making sure these leaves do not get into the river or into the bay. Trying to keep them at least 10 feet away from the inlets, so you have a chance to clean them up before they wash into the inlets. We also have pollution prevention, good housekeeping measures of street sweeping. There's going to be a stronger requirement for street sweeping as we move forward next year. Catch basin and storm drain inlet inspection cleaning, that's changed a little bit too. And then inlet retrofit. So that's putting that grate in front of the inlet so the water bottles don't get in. Okay, so street sweeping, here's the existing standards, right? Once per month, all streets that are owned and operated by municipalities that are curbed with storm drains, that have posted speed limit of 35 miles or less, are not an entrance or exit ramp, and are predominantly commercial area. So a lot of you in towns have been doing a lot of street sweeping. I'm not sure if you even know these were the requirements, but these are what were required in the existing permit. The way they change effective January 1st. So there's triannual street sweeping, so every 4 months. So instead of monthly, it's every 4 months. Street segments of municipal roads have storm drain inlets that are discharged to surface waters. No criteria related to speed limits, commercial areas, exit or entrance ramps, or curbs. So basically, you got to do everything now, but not every month, once every 4 months, right? So annual sweeping every year, street segments of municipal roads that do not have storm drain inlets that discharge the surface water. So I'm not sure what roads those would be. Most roads have inlets that are ultimately discharge the surface waters, but you may have some roads that don't discharge the surface waters. So you have to do those once a year. So everything has a measurable goal with DEP. So the data you're supposed to be collecting, and if you're that stormwater coordinator, this is important to you because you have to submit this every May of every year with your submittal package that you're complying with the regulations. So data and area swept, number of miles of street swept, and amount of debris collected in tons. So you have to quantify this. You have to come up with a way to quantify this. You have to record this. You have to have the records for it. So this has always kind of been in effect, but I don't know how many people have really paid too much attention to it, but I think now we're getting pretty serious about it over the next permit cycle. Okay. So catch basin and storm drain inlet inspection and cleaning. So the way DEP describes it, defines an inlet. So inlet is that grate in the road. So it's the grate on top of the catch basin. The catch basin is the concrete structure under the vault under the grate where the stormwater goes after it goes through the grate. So that's what they're talking about here. So inspect each catch basin inlet at least once every 5 years. Okay. And that's a function of how many you have, right? So we can see that they're collecting, cleaning out the inlet here with a vac truck, not an inexpensive piece of equipment. And also usually a piece of equipment that's hard to keep maintained, right? So things tend to break on these a lot, so you have to be very careful about that. This is kind of the new regulation. So every storm drain inlet, so that's the grate on top, has to be inspected every year. Okay. So a lot of that's just driving around and checking and seeing, what does it look like? Is it still there? Is it clogged? If it's clogged, then obviously you have to go back and kind of clean it out. Catch basins, if you have less than 1,000, you have to inspect them each year and clean the ones that have to be cleaned. Typically, if the catch basin has a third of the catch basin filled with sediment, you have to clean it out. If you have more than 1,000 catch basins, you have to do 20% of the total every year. So I'm dealing with a town that has 10,000 catch basins. Every year they have to inspect 2,000 of them and clean the ones that need to be cleaned. Okay. So once again, keeping records is very important. How many inlets were inspected, how many catch basins were inspected, how many were cleaned, how much material was removed in tons. Once again, all this has to be recorded. Okay. So the other thing that they have in here is they're asking you to increase the frequency in problem areas. We find a lot of times that, we go down a road and there's 5 or 6 catch basins on the east side of the road, and they all flow together. Like water goes into one, it goes down to the next one, next one, next one. And the last 2 in the line are usually the ones that are the worst in the system. So those are the ones that usually get clogged the most, have to get cleaned out the most. So maybe you're doing those more often than doing the other 3. So this allows you to kind of do that under this permit. Okay. Perform inspections after major storms. Passing an ordinance to require private entities to maintain storm facilities and take over private facilities. So, here's the option in the towns. Every single catch basin has to be inspected and cleaned on a regular basis. Now, there's catch basins at the mall that you don't own. There's catch basins maybe in a private housing development that you don't own. You have to ensure that those are also being cleaned and inspected. So you have to do that by passing an ordinance. The other way to do that is to take over those from private facilities and have the township or municipality take over ownership of that and take care of those. So those are really your 2 options. I would imagine the second option is probably not one that a lot of people want to do. It's much easier to pass an ordinance and require the homeowner association or the mall to submit an annual report saying that they've been cleaned and inspected. Okay. The other thing they have on here is coordinate with this mosquito control agency. They're doing a lot of work anyway to make sure that there's no standing water in some of these basins that breed mosquitoes. So maybe there's a way to work with them more closely with them. Remember, they're a county agency in most cases. So it might be hard for 30 some municipalities in Ocean County to coordinate with them, but it may be worthwhile looking into. They may have assistance. The other thing is to retrofit these inlets. I don't know where I stole this picture from, but I'd like it. I think it might actually be from DEP's presentation. So municipalities shall retrofit existing inlets that are in direct contact with repaving, repair, excluding pothole repair, resurfacing, or in direct contact with any reconstruction or alteration facilities. So that's the existing standard. So where the raccoons' heads are sticking out, you're supposed to put a steel bar in front of that, so water bottles and soda bottles can't get into there. And that was what the main retrofit was. And you only had to do it, when you were repaving or repairing a road, resurfacing a road. So you didn't have to go around systematically replacing them until January 1st of 2023. Now you have to do that. So you have to go in, change this lid out and replace it so water bottles can get in there. And you have to do that for every single storm drain you have in a town. Okay. So you can bolt it on. There's a bar you can get here and just bolt on the bar, or you can just replace the grate. And then they have to be with the DOT bicycle safety grates, so that when a bicycle drives over this, person doesn't go over the handlebars, get caught, so that's part of the requirement. So this is all kind of spelled out in the new permit. So this could be a huge expense for the town. Okay, so something to kind of think about as when you're budgeting for the next few years. The other thing is, they want you also to make sure that you identify all your stormwater conveyance features, your ditches and pipes, and inspect, clean, and maintain them as needed. So this is new. You start thinking about inspecting all your stormwater pipes. That could be very expensive too. And cleaning them even more expensive, right? So these are things that you'll see coming out in a new permit. Good housekeeping procedures. This is the fifth of the stormwater pollution prevention mandatory requirements. So we talk a lot about the maintenance yard. This is a place that typically when DEP comes out and does their audits, they will inspect the maintenance yard. They want to make sure your fueling operations are up to code. You have a secondary containment for any time there might be a fuel spill or diesel spill. The vehicle maintenance is being done inside a garage and not out in the open. So any kind of oil or fuel that might be leaking from the vehicles is contained. And then the on-site equipment and washing is in a contained area. So you're not washing oil and mud and grease off vehicles that's going into the storm sewer. Okay. Once again, salt and de-icing material storage. Everybody probably has that in place already. Aggregate material, construction debris storage. A lot of folks have this in place already, whether it's in a walled-in area with a tarp on it, or just a walled-in area that won't allow it to wash away. Street sweeping and catch basin clean out, other material storage. A lot of folks are just putting this in dumpsters and then hauling it away. So where you keep that's important because you don't want that washing away from the yard, into some other place. And yard trimmings and wood waste management sites and roadside vegetation management. So these are things that we worry about. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these. So fueling operations, minimum standards kind of here. I had in here, I actually was looking at Woodbridge's pollution prevention plan, and they have that they inspect all fueling areas on a monthly basis. I think that's a great idea to put that in there, and that could be like a 2-minute inspection, walking around, everything looks good, write it down. It was inspected, the first of the month by so-and-so, and we did our monthly inspection, right? Receipts of bulk fuel deliveries is important to have, so what's on site, and inspection and maintenance of storage tanks, including associated piping and fuel pumps. So when you're inspecting, you really want to make sure that the tanks aren't leaking. Most of the times you're using this stuff on a daily basis. If there's a problem, you report the problem, you fix it. But DEP wants some sort of documentation that you're doing regular inspections of this, right? Secondary containment they want you to have. So in case something breaks, a diesel tank breaks, where's that diesel going to go? So you need a secondary containment area for that. Any discharge in that secondary containment area, you have to make sure that there's valves in place, that it doesn't get discharged, into the environment. So this is all pretty standard procedures that you probably all have in place already. Vehicle maintenance, once again, minimum standards, vehicle maintenance, making sure it's performed indoors. If maintenance is performed outdoors, keeping it away from catch basins and drains and booms. Drip pans must be used at all times. Portable tents to cover if maintenance activity lasts more than a day. So really, they if you're working outside trying to fix the vehicles, they want to make sure that there's no impact to the environment. That's pretty easy to do. On-site equipment and vehicle washing, no unpermitted discharge of wash water to storm drain inlets or local waterways. So you're not allowed to discharge your wash water into the storm drains. It must go into sanitary drains. And if you can't discharge the wastewater into sanitary sewer, it must be contained in a system, ensure it won't leak and hauled away later. And you can see this fellow's washing his township vehicle, all the soapy water going down into the inlet. Not a good scenario. Okay. Salt and de-icing materials. This is a big problem that we've had for a long time in New Jersey. One that I think we've done a great job of managing and building salt sheds to make sure that the salt is not washed away. The bigger issue is when we're using the salt in a storm, making sure we're cleaning up after it, and sweeping the salt back into the salt shed and not letting it get away. So we have a system here like this. So removing piles of excess salt and de-icing material that have been deposited during spreading operations on all municipal roads and parking areas. Remove within 72 hours at the end of the storm events. So I don't know how many of you guys are going to be able to do that, but keep in mind your guys were just out for 48 hours without sleeping, plowing, and salting, and now you need to go out within the next couple of days and clean up those salt piles. So this is going to be, I think you see a lot of overtime attached to this, a lot of time and a half. And we know in New Jersey it only snows on Sundays on a holiday, so it's a triple time or something like that. So anyway, so you have to be worried about this. This is something they had in the original permit 5 years ago, and they pulled it out. So this is something they have once again in this new round of permitting. And more on this stuff. During loading and unloading, conducted during dry weather, prevent and minimize spillage, minimize loader travel between storage area and spreading vehicle, sweep up debris, from storage areas immediately after loading and unloading is completed. So really trying to keep the salt in where it's supposed to be and not let it out into the environment. Reuse and properly discard materials collected during cleanup. Temporary outdoor storage is permitted only under the following conditions. So if you're repairing your salt structure, you can have temporary storage outdoors. It has to be tarped, and it's only good for 30 days. So and more. When you're storing this material, it has to be 200 feet from streams, wells, reservoirs, and drinking water sources. Now, sometimes this is hard. A lot of the public works yards are pretty close to streams. It's usually at a low spot in the town. So you just have to be careful to keep it away from the stream. We don't build salt storage areas in wellhead protected areas. And then we ensure the top elevation pad is no higher than 100. The 100 is higher than 100-year floodplain. So we don't want to build a salt shed in the floodplain. Bad idea, right? Okay. And we want to make sure we divert stormwater around the areas where there's salt. Okay. So berms or curbing, little asphalt curb, maybe to divert water. That might be a great way to do that. And you can see here, salt shed and the loader. And you can see all the salt coming out here. All this would have to be, under this regulation, would have to be cleaned up after the storm. Okay. So they have other recommendations here. Install wind barriers, include paved impervious surfaces as access to storage facilities. Some people have stone areas as access to storage facilities, right? Work with neighboring municipalities to construct joint storage facilities. Yeah, how's that going to work? That's a great idea. We want to share services whenever we can. My experience with shared services, it's very difficult to do. Some towns do a great job of it. Other towns really would rather just manage things on their own. Okay. Then we have some similar things for aggregate and construction debris. Once again, storing it so it doesn't get off site. We have some minimum standards: sand, topsoil, road millings. At least 50 feet from water bodies, right? Or stormwater inlets or ditches. So this is pretty important. And, they have some other stuff in here about millings and guidance on that. Okay. And I think we'll make this presentation available to you guys after this, right? It'll be on the website along with this recording. So once again, this is more about aggregate storage, and they talk a little bit about what DEP wants. When we clean out the catch basins or do street sweeping, we must dispose of this appropriately. There's guidance for that. And you need to look at that and make sure you're complying with that guidance. And road cleanup materials must be placed in storage at a minimum, stored in leak-proof containers or on an impervious surface that is contained, in other words, bermed around the edges of it to control leachate or litter. Removed for disposal within 6 months of placement into storage. So, in other words, you can store the catch basin cleaning or street sweeping on site for up to 6 months before you have to haul it away. Okay. And you can see here, a lot of guys just do this. They dump it into a dumpster and then they have the dumpster hauled away. Another added expense for the municipality, right? Yard trimmings and wood waste management sites. A lot of people have to keep yard trimmings in their yards, in their DPW yards. A lot of towns have a common recycling place where they take things. Okay, so you just have to be careful about, when you're storing it in your yard, what you're doing with it. It talks a little bit about here, composting it. You can't put it in a floodplain, and you want to prevent stormwater from running off of it or into the piles, right? And, a little bit more about that here. Preventing on-site storm drain inlets from siltation, using controls such as hay bale, silt fence, and fabric. So if you do have this stuff being stored in a yard and there are inlets around it, you need to put inlet protection around it. So if stuff does wash into that near that inlet, it doesn't get in. But if you're smart, you're berming around it, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Preventing dry weather runoff from reaching a municipal storm sewer, which is illicit connection. So in other words, dry weather runoff, so as this stuff is decomposing, it's leaching out liquid. You want to make sure that liquid doesn't get into the stormwater system, that leachate. And then removing trash from yard trimmings and waste upon receipt. So monitoring the site for trash on a routine basis, storing trash in leak-proof containers or on impervious surfaces, disposing of collected trash, and then, making sure that doesn't get out into the environment. So roadside vegetation management, this is something that they've changed a little bit on. So you weren't allowed to apply herbicides or on or adjacent to stormwater inlets on steep sloping ground, along curb lines, or along unobstructed shoulders. Municipalities may only apply herbicides within 2-foot radius of surrounding structures where overgrowth is present. So a lot of towns will drive down the road with their DPW truck, and the guy will hang out the window and spray the vegetation around the guardrail. So this is kind of what we're talking about here. The new restrictions is starting January 1st. Application of herbicides to prevent from being washed into waters of state and to prevent erosion by devegetation. So this is previous the roadside vegetation management. So you have to be just more careful with making sure that, one, you're not spraying chemicals anywhere near waterways or inlets. And number two, when you're killing the vegetation, you're not creating an erosion problem that's gonna cause sediment to wash into the waterways. Okay. So stormwater maintenance facilities, this is a big thing that we've been worried about this past couple of years. Anything that's owned and operated by the town must be inspected on an annual basis and ensured that it's working properly. Anything that's owned by privately owned by a homeowner association or one of the malls or things like that, they have to be inspected annually too. And you as a township that's certified that they were inspected. Most people pass an ordinance requiring those places to have a stormwater engineer inspect their facility and file a report on an annual basis. That usually costs the homeowner association anywhere from $400 to about $700 is what I've seen them going for. So it is an expense on their part, but they have to do it. If they don't do it, you as a township could issue fines as a way to make sure that happens. So it talks a little bit about this. You have to ensure that they're being maintained. So the new regulations, identify any MS4 infrastructure that does not already have a specific permit condition. for example, stormwater management basins, and inspect at least 4 times annually and clean and maintain as necessary. Now, there's a caveat to this. If your stormwater basin has a maintenance plan, and that maintenance plan has something different than an annual inspection of 4 times a year, maybe your plan has inspect once a year. You're supposed to follow what's in the approved maintenance plan. Okay, so if you have a stormwater detention basin in your town, you have a maintenance plan for it, it says inspect annually, then you inspect it annually as per the maintenance plan. If you don't have a maintenance plan, then you're required to inspect it 4 times a year and then clean it and maintain it as necessary. So for me, that would make me want to write maintenance plans for all my stormwater infrastructure. So, I mean, so that's one way to do this. And maybe some of these do need to be inspected more than once a year. Okay, but certainly something to kind of think about. Okay, all these facilities should have a maintenance plan anyway. A lot of them don't because they were built a long time ago, but it might be worthwhile going in and creating maintenance plans for them for specifically for each facility. Ones that are not owned and operated by the towns, they still have to also be inspected and maintained. One way to do that is to pass that ordinance and make private homeowners associations do that. Problem is some of these basins are on individual properties. When we did this in, when I was part of a consulting company in the 80s, what we wound up doing was we would have a 2-acre lot. That was the big lot. And that homeowner would, instead of having a 1-acre lot, he'd get the 2-acre lot and he would have all this open space attached to it, which was the detention basin. Now that homeowner is responsible for maintaining that detention basin, and they're not too happy about it. So that's something to be a little bit aware about. You'll see pushback from that. So, so Woodbridge uses their public works department to do roadside erosion control. And I talked to him a little bit about this. I like this procedure. So you're supposed to identify if there's any roadside erosion, right? So along the road. So and you need to do these regular inspections. Now, one way to do that is just simply train your public works guys what to look for. And then when they're out there on their day-to-day work, if they see something, they report it. And you record it and you put it in a report. You schedule time to go back and inspect it and maybe make repairs if necessary. So this is a way to avoid having a whole nother inspection routine. Okay, so that's something to try to avoid. Okay, so here they want you to check the shoulders, the embankment stitches, and like I said, can be done in tandem with other municipal inspections. I don't like this last bullet, repair problems within 90 days of discovery. So that might be hard in some cases. You may need a permit, emergency permit from DEP to make the repair. But the goal of that is to try to get it fixed quickly, right? And that's what the thing is. If you can't get it done in 90 days, then you probably should have a report of why you couldn't get it done in 90 days, right? Employee training. This really hasn't changed much. You need to be trained. Employees should be trained on best management practices. The municipal boards and governing boards should be trained. So your planning board, zoning board, board of adjustments, township committee, environmental commissioners should all be trained on stormwater issues. And anybody who's reviewing designs has to have a special training for that and be certified to be able to do that. So requirements, we have to now map all MS4 infrastructure. It has to be done electronically into a database that can be loaded into, well, here they have a geodatabase or AutoCAD file. So they have definitely mapping requirements there, and that's going to be due December 31st of 2025. Another big expense for some towns. Okay. Stream scouring. This has always been part of the regulations. Inspect the outfall for once every 5 years. And they want you to make sure that you have a system in place. Once you inspect them, they're scouring to try to fix that within 30 days or remediate within 12 months, depending on what's going on there. So the idea is that when you see scouring from an outfall, you've got to fix it, but you have to inspect it. Once again, any outfalls that are flowing during dry weather certainly will have will certainly have some issues that it may be an illicit connection. It may just be groundwater influent or infiltrating into the stormwater pipe. So the idea is that if you have a stormwater outflow flowing, it hasn't rained in 3 days, you need to test it. There's a whole protocol for that. The last thing is this watershed improvement plan. This is something new. So all towns will be required to do a watershed improvement plan. It's designed to improve water quality problems. It focuses on the MS4 contributions to water bodies impairments and TNDL impairments. Reduces or eliminates flooding. Thinking about human health, the environment. Okay. And then the plan shall be developed with input from residents, businesses, neighboring towns, and other discharges. So this is DEP's attempt to get you to look at past problems that were created, many areas that don't have any stormwater management, and identify where there are opportunities to retrofit it with stormwater management. They have different phases here. By 2025, the end of the year, you need to have prepared and submitted a watershed inventory report. By the end of that same year, you need to have conducted a prepare and submit a watershed assessment report. And then you also need to have a watershed assessment improvement plan. So these are the 3 things that you need. I don't know if those dates are exactly right, but I could check that for you. And that's it. So I don't mean to be an alarmist on this, but for those of you who have been doing business as usual with your MS4 system, you really need to download the draft of the permit that's coming out in January and review it, because there's a lot of things in there that are being added, and some of them may be big budget ticket items. So if you're thinking about next year's budget, about who you need to hire, this is the time to be doing that now. If you have any questions, you can always call DEP. You can call me, call Steve Souza. We could talk you through some of it. But the way it's looking right now, the requirements are going to certainly be more intense than they were in past years. That's it, Britt. I'm done. Can I go to lunch now?
Thank you very much, Chris. And I want to follow up with a couple of questions or comments that we have from folks online, but also to share our new tool that we developed. I think a lot of the folks that are from towns would like to see, and maybe you would too, Chris, as part of this project.
Right.
So how can I do that really quick, Avery? I pulled it up already.
Oh. So we'll share the screen here.
Oh, I like Ed's question about if the township isn't plowing or salting, who's responsible for the post-storm salt cleanup? I think it's still the township, but that's an excellent question, Ed. I think maybe that's a question we need to ask DEP about that. But yeah, because some towns actually probably contract out all that stuff, right? So should they be responsible, right? And Robert mentioned the hardest thing is to quantify the tonnage of the street sweeper. Yeah, you're telling me there's going to be a lot of guessing in that, I think. So you'll see some of that going on, but there is some information out there from I got some information from Minnesota and Wisconsin who've done a lot of work on street sweeping, and I'm starting to review some of that now to help quantify what the impacts of street sweeping are, and better ways of quantifying amounts that are picked up. So hopefully I'll have some information out to you guys over the next couple of months. Okay, Britt, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I'm going to follow up on, just because I know this is on Ed and Plumstead's mind, and we have a couple of folks from Plumstead online here. They actually recently, it seems the DEP is wanting to switch them from a tier B to a tier A municipality. And I know you mentioned that for a minute, Chris. Do you have any insight on that? That I know the township officials were, discussing internally and perhaps even with the DEP about, what caused that change. And you had mentioned in the beginning about, the DEP kind of wanting to get away from the, get everybody into the tier A.
Yeah, my understanding is DEP wanted to put everybody in tier A. I don't know if they went that far. It was always based on, they had this classification as a rural municipality, right? And I'm not sure how that was classified. I'm not sure what they decided, whether it was population, whether it was, infrastructure, whether it was miles of road. I'm not sure exactly what that was originally. There were 99. We had 465 municipalities. I'm sorry, 565 municipalities in New Jersey, and 99 of them were Tier B, and the rest were Tier A. So my understanding is they would like to move all the Tier Bs into Tier A to get them to do everything that everybody else has to do. So I mean, there's two ways to look at that. One way is that, well, we had it pretty good for, since 2004, for almost 20 years. We got off the hook from having to do everything, right? So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, oh my God, now we got to do all this other stuff. It's going to be hard to do. One thing that you may be able to request, though, is that if you're being moved from a Tier B to a Tier A, I wonder if there's any funding available from the state to help you catch up. So that might be something to ask the state about. I mean, they have a lot of grant money they're giving out now. So I'm wondering if there's a way that you can ask the state, well, we'll move to a Tier A, but we got a lot of catching up to do. Is there any funding available to help us get there? And I think that might be a good question to ask. And I don't know what the criteria was for that. So
I appreciate that. And I think it's a good question for Plumstead to raise, and we would happily support them, in terms of catching up and any funding available. I see Eric's asking also about the state and county being held to the same standards. Chris, do you have any comment about that?
I'm sorry, who's being held to the same standard? Oh, the state and county. Yeah. So, this all applies to the road department. So there was always different categories. So there was the DOT department. So the county and the state Department of Transportation also have to follow these permits. There's a special MS4 permit for them. Okay. And there's also one for facilities. So for example, like Ocean County College would have their own permit. Rutgers has their own permit. Maybe some big hospital facilities may have their own permit. So really is meant to apply to everybody. And what they really tried to pay attention to this time was they were trying to make sure that the people who were kind of under the radar last time are now being caught in this net. So now they're asking you pass an ordinance to make sure that privately owned catch basins are also being inspected and cleaned. So they're really trying to make sure that everybody gets caught with that. So I think that's going to be important.
Well, this is our new landing site, which you can go to the Save Barnegat Bay website, to this Advocate tab, and then over to a box which is called Municipal Stormwater Requirements. And for everybody, you can see we developed sort of a public facing report card and the criteria. So all of the towns that are in Ocean County, of which there are 33, and 4 Monmouth County towns that a portion of their land drains to Barnegat Bay. Here's how we developed this criteria. Certainly, if you're online here and you see your town and you think we're just missing something, please send it over and we will update this. We would obviously like all the towns that drain to Barnegat Bay to be in the A column, and we're not that far off. The towns that are out of compliance have a few little housekeeping things to do. And I think that Barnegat Bay Watershed, we'd love to achieve those things by the end of this year. So we can walk away from this grant program saying that our watershed is completely compliant with the stormwater rules. Here's a visual map one of our interns made, just to kind of give you an idea where we're at. And then for each town, you have a tab. So we could just pick Barnegat Light, and it'll take you to your report card and a checklist of all the ordinances required, your stormwater management, pollution prevention plan, and then the documents are here in linkable tabs. So if we looked at ordinances, and you could go to your town, you'll see all the ordinances that are required and the links to where they're available online.